Welcome to Module 6. In this video, or in this unit, we are going to learn how to begin to work with variables or letters. And I just want to disclose to not let that scare you, because it's really not as bad as we think it is. I understand that bringing the alphabet into math may sound scary, which I do get that. But if you take it one step at a time, it's not too bad. So with that being said, let's just slowly ease our way into that idea. But in order to do that, let's start talking about the idea of an equation. So an equation is a mathematical statement that tells us that both sides of an equal signs are equal to one another. So for example, 4 equals 4 is an example of an equation. So is 7 plus 8 equals 8 plus 7. This here is an equation. This is telling us that 7 plus 8 is equal to 8 plus 7. Or we can also write another equation like 4 squared equals 4 times 4. This is also an equation. But then, once we start bringing in letters, we will see something called a linear equation. And a linear equation is an equation that has a variable with no exponents. So, for example, what that might look like is something like x plus 3 equals 4. So here, this is called a variable. So any letters that you see in math, those are called variables. And then here, this whole side of this equation, this is called an expression. And then this whole thing as a whole, because there's an equal sign, this whole thing creates a linear equation. And now one thing I do want to point out is that variables here, they're just something called a placeholder. They are just simply there to hold this place. And variables, also, you can think of them as like a question. Because if we have x plus 3, is really just asking us what plus 3 equals 4. So what do we have to add 3 to get to 4? In that case, we just have to add 1, because 1 plus 3 equals 4. So therefore, from that logic, we can say that x actually equals 1. And that is actually correct. So we can logic our way through this as well. Letters or variables are just questions. They're just placeholders. That's all that they are. So before we actually get into solving these things, though, let's talk about a little bit more. So in order to solve linear equations, we have to begin to think about opposite operations, which we have done for a while. So the opposite of addition is subtraction. The opposite of subtraction is addition. The opposite of multiplication is division. And the opposite of division is multiplication. So with that in mind, in the following problems, let's get these values equal to 0. And to do that, we are going to add and subtract their opposite values. So in this case, we have a positive 2, so we're going to subtract 2 to get that to equal to 0. Here we're going to subtract 13, which gets at 0. And because we have a negative 2 in this case, to get that equal to 0, we're going to add 2. And then here, because we have a negative, we're going to add that 7. And we have a 107, which is positive, so we're going to subtract that to get to 0. And then in this following section, we're going to use multiplication and division to get these numbers to equal to 1. So in this case, when we have 44, to get that equal to 1, we're just going to simply divide that by 44, which is 1. 21. We can divide that by 21, which will get us 1. And then here, if we have 1/4, to get this equal to 1, we're going to multiply it by 4. Because, right, 4 is the same thing as 4/1. And as we've seen, when we multiply fractions, these two 4's will cancel out. We're just left with 1. And then here, we're going to do the same thing, except for we're going to multiply by 16. These cancel, you're left with 1. This equals 1. And then here, to get this equal to 1, we're just going to simply multiply by negative 101. And the reason why I say negative is because we have a negative out here. Negative times a negative is a positive. And then these 101s cancel out. So you're just left with 1.